Not mythic conquest, but the slow turning of a copper kettle in a cramped Galata shop. While poets of empires speak of grand sieges and jeweled courts, your world is the soot-stained wall, the lingering taste of bitter beans, and the muffled arguments of weary men. If the gentle hum of history helps you unwind, feel free to like, share, or simply listen. No grand gestures required. You might leave a soft comment about the scent of smoke or the clatter of a wooden spoon. We'll read each note like a quiet footfall in the courtyard. The lantern flickers, the ash settles, and the night outside the golden horn sighs, opening the door to your story. You push the heavy oak door ajar, and the hinges sigh as if relieved to be released from the day's heat. The last sliver of daylight slips behind the great dome of the Suleimani, its silhouette still sharp against the sky, a dark crown that the city has learned to recognize as a signal that the market stalls will soon close, and the streets will begin to echo with the call to prayer. The stone walls of the coffee house greet you with a cool dampness, a reminder that the rain that fell 3 nights ago has not yet fully left its mark on the mortar. A faint perfume of burnt wood mingles with the exotic scent of ground coffee, a scent that arrived from the highlands of Yemen only a few years ago, in 1553, when the first caravans bearing the dark beans made their way through the Bosphorus Strait and up the winding streets of Galata. The aroma is both foreign and familiar, like a distant memory that has settled into the very pores of the city. The room itself is a low-ceilinged box, its stone ribs supporting a ceiling that seems to lean inward, as if trying to protect the conversations within from the wind that whistles through the narrow alleys outside. The walls are stained with the soot of countless evenings, each layer a silent record of the smoke that has risen from countless kettles. A single lantern sways from a wrought iron hook, its oil-filled glass catching the amber light and throwing it onto the worn wooden benches in a pattern that resembles the rippling surface of the Bosphorus at night. The shadows it casts dance lazily, stretching and shrinking as the flame flickers, a quiet choreography that never seems to tire. You notice how the lantern's iron chain is pitted with rust, a small testament to the years it has endured, and you smile faintly at the thought that even the metal has learned to accept the inevitable wear of time. You straighten the copper kettle that sits on the iron-studded hearth, feeling the weight of its thick handle, the coldness of the metal against your palm. The kettle is old, its surface mottled with a patina that tells of countless mornings and evenings when it has boiled water for tea, for broth, for the very coffee you are about to prepare. When you lift it, the clank of the iron handle against the copper body rings out like a muted bell in a distant mosque, a sound that seems to echo through the stone arches of the nearby caravanserai, where merchants once stored their silk and spices. The sound is soft enough not to disturb the murmurs already filling the room, yet distinct enough to remind you that the ritual of brewing is as much a part of the evening as the conversations that will follow. The smoke from the kettle curls upward, spiraling in lazy loops that cling to the low ceiling before disappearing into the darkness above. It moves as if it were a veil, gently obscuring the harshness of the world beyond the walls, wrapping the room in a hushed intimacy. The air is thick with the scent of burnt wood, a smell that has become as familiar to you as the taste of the coffee itself. It is a scent that speaks of evenings spent in quiet contemplation, of stories whispered over steaming cups, of the occasional burst of laughter that never quite breaks the calm. You inhale deeply, feeling the smoke settle in the back of your throat, and you notice how it softens the edges of the room, turning the stone into something more pliable, more receptive. Your eyes wander to the table before you, a sturdy slab of oak scarred by the countless cups that have rested upon it. A loaf of bread lies there, its crust still warm from the oven of the previous night. The bread is stale, its crumb dry and crumbly, yet it carries a story of its own. It was baked by a baker who claimed the dough rose as slowly as the empire's fortunes, a quiet joke that has become a small legend among the regulars. The baker, a man of few words, would often mutter about the fickle nature of the wind that sometimes blew the flames too low, leaving the loaves undercooked, or too high, turning them to ash. You can almost hear his voice now, low and resigned, as he slides the loaves onto the wooden board, his hands dusted with flour that clings to his sleeves like a second skin. You set the kettle down, and the water inside begins to hiss, a soft, steady sound that seems to synchronize with the rhythm of your own breathing. The copper kettle, with its polished surface now reflecting the lantern's amber glow, appears almost ceremonial, as if it were a relic from a time when every act of hospitality was a small offering to the divine. You watch the steam rise, a thin veil that blurs the line between the tangible and the ethereal, and you think of the countless evenings when this same steam has risen, carrying with it the hopes and worries of those who gathered here. The steam, like the smoke, is a reminder that even the most solid of things can become fleeting, dissolving into the night. The room is already filling with the low murmur of voices, the soft rustle of robes, the occasional clink of copper cups against wooden tables. A few patrons sit hunched over their own cups, their faces illuminated by the lantern's glow, their eyes half closed as if they are listening to a story only they can hear. You notice a man in a faded coat, his beard trimmed short, his hands wrapped around a cup as if it were a shield against the chill that seeps through the stone walls. He does not speak, but his presence adds a weight to the atmosphere, a quiet acknowledgement that the night is a shared space, a communal pause from the bustling streets outside. You begin the ritual of grinding the beans, the stone grinder sitting in the corner like an ancient sentinel. Its heavy base is anchored to the floor, its grinding stone worn smooth by years of use. You pour a handful of the dark, fragrant beans into the hopper, feeling the slight resistance as they tumble down. The grinder's crank turns with a steady, measured rhythm, the sound of the stone grinding against the beans a low, comforting hum that blends with the crackle of the fire. Each turn releases a burst of aroma, a reminder that the beans have traveled far, crossing deserts and seas, carried by merchants who risked storms and bandits to bring this bitter gift to the empire's heart. As the coffee grounds settle, you pour the hot water over them, watching the dark liquid swirl and bloom, the surface rippling like the Bosphorus under a gentle wind. The first pour releases a thin stream that darkens the copper pot, the color deepening with each passing moment. You watch the coffee as it drips, the droplets forming tiny circles on the bottom of the pot before merging into a richer, more concentrated brew. The process is slow, deliberate, a meditation in itself, each step a small act of patience that mirrors the larger cadence of the city's life. You pour the coffee into a copper cup, its interior polished to a shine that reflects the lantern's light like a tiny sun. The cup feels warm in your hand, the metal conducting the heat from the brew, a gentle reminder that the world outside may be cold, but within these walls there is a steady, comforting warmth. You bring the cup to your lips, and the first sip is bitter, the taste of the beans sharp against your tongue, a reminder of the empire's taxes that will soon be levied on this very commodity. The bitterness is balanced by a faint, smoky undertone, as if the coffee itself has absorbed the stories of the stone walls and the smoke that has risen for generations. You set the cup down, and the lantern's flame flickers, casting a brief, wavering shadow across the table. The smoke from the cup rises in a thin column, joining the other tendrils that curl around the ceiling, a silent chorus of vapor that seems to whisper of evenings past and those yet to come. You feel the weight of the night settle around you like a well-worn coat, its fabric familiar. It seems stitched with the threads of countless conversations, of laughter held back, of secrets shared in hushed tones. The coat is heavy, but it is also comforting, a reminder that you are part of something larger, a small but essential part of the city's nightly rhythm outside. The city's skyline is a jagged silhouette against the darkening sky, the minarets of mosques rising like slender fingers pointing toward the heavens. The distant call to prayer drifts faintly over the rooftops, a melodic reminder that time moves forward, even as the night seems to linger. The sound reaches the coffeehouse through the thin walls, a soft echo that blends with the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of voices inside. It is a sound that has marked the passing of hours for centuries, a constant in a world that is otherwise in flux. You glance at the ledger tucked behind the bar, its pages yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible. The ledger records the coffeehouse's opening in 1555, a modest entry that notes the first day the doors were unlocked, the first cup of coffee brewed, the first patron who entered with a curious look. You think of the countless names that have been added over the years, the scribbles of merchants, scholars, soldiers, and wanderers, each leaving a small imprint on the paper. The ledger is a quiet testament to continuity, a reminder that while empires rise and fall, the simple act of sharing a drink remains unchanged. You settle back into the rhythm of the evening, the kettle's soft hiss, the lantern's amber glow, the steady beat of your own breath. The stale bread on the table remains, its crust still warm, its interior dry, a small reminder that even the simplest things carry stories. You allow the night to envelop you, the smoke curling around your thoughts, the shadows moving gently across the stone walls, the world outside receding into a soft, distant hum. In this quiet space, you find a steady peace, a moment of stillness that feels as enduring as the stone beneath your feet. The night settles around you like a well-worn coat. The door sighs shut behind you, and the lantern's amber pool steadies, as if waiting for a voice to rise from the low-ceilinged stone. The air is thick with the lingering perfume of Yemeni beans, a scent that has only a few years behind it in this quarter of the city, yet already feels as ancient as the arches that frame the courtyard outside. You glance at the copper kettle, its iron handle cold to the touch, and hear the faint, muted clang that reverberates like a distant prayer bell. The smoke curls upward, a slow, wavering veil that seems to soften the edges of the world beyond the walls. A soft rustle of fabric announces the arrival of the first patron. He steps through the doorway with the measured gait of someone accustomed to the bustling lanes of the Grand Bazaar, his faded fez perched at a slight angle, its brim brushing the hem of a robe that carries the dust of silk stalls and spice sacks. The robe's colors have faded to a muted ochre, the once vivid threads now dulled by countless journeys between stalls. He pauses, eyes scanning the room as if measuring the weight of the evening before he settles onto a bench that has been worn smooth by generations of elbows and elbows of the world. You notice the way his hands, calloused yet careful, rest on the edge of the bench. The fingertips are stained faintly with the ochre of turmeric, a reminder of the market's endless barter. He lifts a small, weathered notebook, its pages edged with the thin, uneven lines of a scribe's hand, and places it on the table with a soft thud. The notebook is a familiar companion to scholars who wander the city's intellectual circles, its cover cracked at the corners from being opened and closed in the dim light of many coffee houses. He orders a cup of kava, his voice low, the syllables rolling like a quiet river. Plain without sugar, he says, and you feel a faint smile tug at the corner of your mouth. The custom of drinking coffee unsweetened has not yet been eclipsed by the later trend of adding honey or sugar, a habit that will not become common until the last decade of the 16th century. You nod, and the stone grinder, a massive, time-worn device that has stood in this corner since the house first opened its doors in 1555, begins its slow, rhythmic turn. The stone wheel grinds the beans with a patient, grinding sound that is almost musical, a low hum that blends with the distant murmur of the city outside. The ledger you once glimpsed behind the bar, its pages yellowed and its ink faded, records the day the grinder was installed. You recall the entry, stone grinder placed, coffee beans from Yemen, 1555. The simplicity of that line feels like a quiet promise, a foundation upon which the evenings of countless patrons have been built. You pour the freshly ground beans into the copper pot, the dark liquid swirling like a slow tide, and watch as the steam rises, carrying with it the faint aroma of cardamom that has begun to mingle with the coffee's natural earthiness. The scent is a reminder of the empire's far-reaching trade routes, the same routes that bring spices from the Levant and the distant hills of Ethiopia. The scholar's eyes flicker to the kettle as you set the cup before him. He lifts the porcelain, its thin rim catching the lantern's light, and inhales the bitter perfume. The taste is sharp, a metallic edge that seems to echo the empire's own fiscal policies. You think, almost without thinking, of the tax that will be imposed a few years later, the Bazak levy, intended to fund the Sultan's fountains, but often leaving merchants grumbling over the cost of a single cup. The irony is quiet, like a whisper in the stone walls, how the bitterness of coffee can mirror the bitterness of a levy, both intended to sustain the city's grandeur while leaving its people to sip cautiously. He begins to speak, his voice a thin thread that weaves through the thick haze of smoke. He mentions the recent campaign of the Janissaries in Hungary, the clatter of swords, and the distant thunder of artillery that have become part of the empire's ever-expanding narrative. The words are measured, each syllable placed with the care of a calligrapher tracing a tugra. You listen, feeling the weight of his observations settle like ash in the hearth, a quiet accumulation that does not disturb the flame but adds to its glow. The conversation drifts, and you notice the subtle ways the room responds. The lantern's flame flickers, casting brief shadows that dance across the stone floor, then settle again as if remembering their place. The smoke, now thicker, curls around the low beams, forming shapes that resemble distant ships, perhaps a silent homage to the Navy's recent endeavors, the memory of a loss at sea that still lingers in whispered conversations. The scholar's words, though focused on distant battlefields, carry an undercurrent of the everyday, the price of grain, the cost of a loaf of bread, the way the market stalls shift with each season. You pour another cup, the copper pot's handle warm against your palm, and set it before him. The scholar accepts it with a nod, his fingers brushing the porcelain, leaving a faint imprint of oil that will soon be absorbed by the cup's glaze. He takes a sip, and the iron taste of the brew meets his tongue, a reminder of the empire's own ironclad resolve. The bitterness lingers, and you cannot help but note, in a quiet aside, that the coffee's edge is as sharp as the tax collector's ledger entries, both designed to extract, both essential to the city's pulse. The scholar pauses, his gaze drifting to the corner where a small, cracked tile lies beneath the bench. The tile, a fragment of the original flooring, bears a faded geometric pattern reminiscent of the imperial tiles that once adorned the Hagia Sophia after its conversion. It is a small reminder that even the most grandiose structures are built upon layers of history, each piece repurposed, each story reshaped. You think of the way the empire has taken the old and made it new, a process that mirrors the scholar's own pursuit of knowledge. Grasping the past to understand the present, a servant moves silently along the periphery, refilling the kettle with water from a barrel that has seen many nights. The water is cool, its surface reflecting the lantern's glow like a dark mirror. You watch the servant's movements, the way his sleeves brush the stone, the faint creak of his sandals on the uneven floor. He is a background note in this evening's composition, his presence felt but not heard, his work a steady rhythm that underpins the more conspicuous conversations. The scholar's voice softens as he turns his thoughts inward, reflecting on the nature of learning in a city that thrives on trade and conquest. He mentions the recent arrival of a new manuscript, a collection of verses from a poet in the East, whose words speak of the Bosphorus's night currents and the moon's reflection upon its waters. The verses are recited in a low, melodic tone, each line a ripple that spreads through the room, touching the ears of those who listen. You feel the cadence of his speech align with the slow pour of coffee, each drop a syllable, each sip a pause. You notice the way the lantern's light catches the edge of the scholar's fez, casting a thin halo around it, as if the hat itself were a small, private sun. The light seems to soften the lines of his face, the creases around his eyes becoming less sharp, the furrowed brow easing into a gentle curiosity. In that moment, the room feels like a sanctuary, a place where the weight of empire can be set aside for a brief interlude of contemplation. The conversation drifts toward the future, the scholar speaking of the potential for new trade routes, of caravans that might bring spices from distant lands, of the possibility that coffee itself could become a staple beyond the walls of Istanbul. He muses that perhaps one day sugar will be added to the brew, a sweetening that will change the very character of the drink. You listen, aware that his speculation is both hopeful and pragmatic, a reflection of the city's ever-evolving palate. A quiet chuckle escapes you, almost unnoticed, as you think of the baker who claimed his dough rose as slowly as the empire's fortunes. The baker's claim, spoken weeks earlier in the market, now seems a fitting metaphor for the slow, steady rise of the coffee's froth, the way it swells and settles, never in a rush, always in its own time. The irony is gentle, a soft smile that does not disturb the calm but adds a subtle warmth to the evening. The scholar finishes his cup, the porcelain now empty, the last droplets clinging to the rim like tiny mirrors. He places the cup back on the table with a soft clink, the sound echoing faintly against the stone walls. He folds his notebook, the pages rustling like dry leaves, and slides it back into his satchel, the leather creaking softly. He bows his head slightly, a gesture of respect that acknowledges both the host and the shared ritual of coffee. You clear the cup, the copper's surface still warm from the last sip, and set it aside to cool. The scholar rises, his robes rustling, and steps toward the doorway, his silhouette merging with the shadows that cling to the stone. He pauses at the threshold, turns back, and offers a quiet teshakur ederim, a simple thanks that carries the weight of gratitude without fanfare. You nod, feeling the exchange settle like a soft layer of ash over the hearth, a quiet conclusion to the evening's first dialogue. The lantern's flame steadies once more, its amber glow filling the space left by the scholar's departure. The smoke, now thinner, drifts lazily toward the ceiling, its movement slow and unhurried, as if the room itself were breathing. You lean against the wooden bench, feeling the worn grain beneath your palm, and let the quiet hum of the coffeehouse settle around you. The night outside deepens, the city's distant calls to prayer drifting in, their cadence a gentle reminder of the world beyond these stone walls. In this moment, the weight of history feels less like a burden and more like a soft blanket, draped over the shoulders of the present. The coffee's bitterness lingers on your tongue, a reminder of the empire's complexities, while the warmth of the fire steadies your thoughts. You hear the soft scrape of a sandal against the stone floor before the spill even reaches the air, a quiet prelude to the dark river that will soon spread across the boards. The servant from the caravanserai, his sleeves still scented with the spice-laden wind of the market, nudges the tray with a careless flick of his wrist. A cup of coffee, still steaming, its surface mottled with the thin foam that forms when the brew meets the cool night, tips forward, and the liquid begins its slow, deliberate descent. It does not splash, it slides, a viscous ribbon that clings to the stone as if reluctant to leave the warmth of the hearth behind. In that moment the room seems to hold its breath, the amber glow of the lantern dimming, just enough to let the shadows gather around the spill, as if the darkness itself were curious about the fate of the dark brew. You step forward, the weight of your own boots a familiar counterpoint to the lightness of the coffee's movement. The floorboards, worn smooth by generations of patrons who have shuffled in and out with their own burdens, are already darkening where the liquid spreads. It stains the stone in a deliberate, almost artistic fashion, each droplet leaving a tiny, glossy imprint that catches the lantern's wavering light. The pattern is not random, it follows the natural grain of the stone, a reminder that even chaos respects the underlying order of the world. You notice how the coffee's sheen mirrors the polished brass of the kettle you have just set back on its iron stand, the same kettle whose clank earlier reminded you of a distant mosque bell. The irony is quiet, almost invisible. The very vessel that once sang a muted note now watches its contents betray it, slipping away like a whispered prayer lost in the wind. Kneeling, you feel the coolness of the stone against your knees, a sensation that steadies the breath that has been rising with the smoke. The air is thick with the mingled aromas of burnt wood, the faint perfume of Yemeni beans, and now the earthy scent of coffee mingling with the stone's own mineral perfume. You reach for the rag that hangs on a peg near the hearth, a cloth that has seen more spills than the city's fountains have seen water. Its edges are frayed, the fibers worn thin where countless hands have twisted and wrung it over the years. The rag's color has faded to a dull gray, a shade that seems to absorb the lantern's amber light rather than reflect it, as if it were a small, unassuming piece of night itself. You press the rag onto the spreading coffee, feeling the texture of the cloth yield under your palm. The fibers soak up the dark liquid, darkening the once pale weave in a slow, deliberate bloom. As you work, the rag makes a soft, muffled sound against the stone, a sound that could be mistaken for the distant murmur of a market stall or the rustle of a silk veil. The act of wiping becomes a meditation, each motion a measured breath. You notice how the rag's frayed edges curl slightly, like the tips of a well-worn quill, and you allow a quiet smile to rise, an unspoken acknowledgement that even the most humble tools bear the marks of history. Just as the empire's grandest monuments bear the scars of time beneath the rag, the floor reveals a threadbare rug that has lain there since the early days of the Ottoman period. When Anatolian weavers first began to export their woven goods to the bustling ports of Istanbul. The rug's pattern is modest, a series of interlocking geometric shapes that repeat with a disciplined regularity. Its colors are muted, earthy reds and soft ochres, fading now to a paler hue where the coffee has seeped in, leaving a faint, darkened outline that will linger long after the stain is gone. You trace one of the rug's lines with a fingertip, feeling the slight roughness of the wool where the fibers have been worn thin by countless footsteps. The design reminds you, in a quiet way, of the imperial tiles that once adorned the walls of the Hagia Sophia after its conversion, their intricate motifs repurposed and reimagined for a new era. The rug, like those tiles, carries the weight of a past that has been reshaped. Its original purpose softened but not erased. The coffee's dark stain spreads slowly across the rug, following the grain of the weave as if it were a river seeking the lowest point. You watch the liquid seep into the fibers, each droplet disappearing into the wool's depths, only to emerge moments later as a darker shade of the rug's own color. It is a subtle transformation, one that mirrors the way the empire itself absorbs the influences of distant lands, spices from the Levant, beans from Yemen, ideas from the scholars of the bazaar, yet retains its own identity beneath the surface. A faint irony settles in the back of your mind. The rug, designed to protect the floor from wear, now bears the mark of a spill that could have been avoided with a steadier hand, much like the empire's own attempts to shield its people from the tremors of war and taxation. You lift the rag, now saturated with coffee, and press it against a wooden bucket that sits near the hearth. The bucket, carved from a single piece of oak, bears the faint imprint of a maker's mark, a simple cross that has weathered many seasons. The water inside is cool, a contrast to the heat of the stone and the lingering warmth of the coffee. As you wring the rag, the liquid drains away, forming small rivulets that tumble down the bucket's side, disappearing into the darkness below. The sound is soft, a gentle trickle that blends with the low crackle of the fire and the occasional sigh of the lantern's flame. You notice how the water carries with it a faint sheen of oil from the coffee, a reminder that even the act of cleaning cannot fully erase the presence of what once was. Your back aches slightly as you straighten, the muscles in your spine protesting the prolonged bend. The ache is a familiar companion, a reminder that the work of keeping the coffeehouse running is as steady and unrelenting as the tide of the Bosphorus that laps against the city's shores. You shift your weight, feeling the cool stone against the soles of your feet, and you allow the ache to settle into a low, rhythmic pulse, much like the distant drums of a marching Janissary regiment that you sometimes hear echo through the narrow streets at night. The pain is not sharp, It is a dull, persistent reminder that every action, even the simplest act of mopping a spill, carries with it a cost, a small tribute to the effort required to maintain order in a place where chaos is always waiting just beyond the doorway. You straighten the copper kettle once more, its iron handle cool to the touch after the brief interlude. The kettle hangs from its hook, swaying gently with the movement of the air that carries the lingering smoke. The lantern above continues its slow, hypnotic dance, casting amber shadows that flicker across the walls, now free of the coffee's dark stain, but still bearing the faint imprint of the incident. The room settles back into its familiar rhythm, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional clink of a copper cup, the soft sigh of the fire as it consumes the last of the wood. The spill, now largely erased, leaves behind a subtle alteration in the rug's pattern, a darker line that will fade over time, a quiet testament to the moment when the coffee briefly claimed the floor as its own. You pause for a moment, breathing in the mingled scents of burnt wood, coffee, and the faint perfume of the rug's wool. The air feels a little heavier, as if the room has absorbed the spill's memory and is now exhaling it slowly, like a sigh released after a long conversation. The lantern's light, steadier now, seems to hold a softer glow, as though it, too, has been soothed by the act of restoration. You let your gaze drift to the stone arches that frame the doorway, their surfaces still damp with the faint trace of smoke, and you feel a quiet continuity between the small, personal act of cleaning and the larger, ongoing maintenance of the city itself. The empire's grand structures endure not only through stone and marble, but through the countless, unnoticed gestures of those who tend to its daily life. A servant returns, his eyes briefly meeting yours, a silent acknowledgement passing between you. He carries a fresh tray of bread, the crust still warm, the interior soft and slightly yeasty, a reminder that the night's provisions are never truly finished, only paused. You accept the tray with a nod, the weight of the fresh loaves a gentle counterbalance to the earlier heaviness of the spill. The bread's aroma mingles with the lingering coffee scent, creating a layered fragrance that feels both comforting and slightly bittersweet, much like the empire's own blend of triumphs and tribulations. You set the new loaves on the table, arranging them beside the copper kettle and the empty cups that await the next round of patrons. The stone floor, now clean, reflects the lantern's amber glow in a muted sheen, a surface that will soon be walked upon, stepped over, and perhaps stained again as the cycles of day and night repeat. The rug beneath, its pattern subtly altered, will continue to bear the marks of countless footsteps, each one a story, each one a quiet contribution to the tapestry of the city's history. In the quiet that follows, you feel the room's heartbeat, a slow, steady pulse that matches the rhythm of your own breathing. The spill has been tended to, the rug's fibers soothed, the kettle steadied, and the lantern's light steadier still. The night resumes its gentle hum, a lullaby of smoke, stone, and whispered conversations, inviting you to settle back into the rhythm that has become your own. You allow the calm to settle over you, a soft blanket of stillness that wraps around the room and your thoughts alike. The world outside may churn, but within these walls the moment stretches. You hear the low crackle of the fire before you see the older merchant rise from his bench, his shoulders already bowed by years of hauling silk bundles and weighing spices in the grand bazaar. The lantern above sways gently, its amber light catching the faint silver of his beard, each strand flecked with gray like the dust that settles on the stone arches of the caravanserai across the street. He places his copper cup down with a soft clink that reverberates against the stone walls, a sound that reminds you of the distant toll of a bell in the mosque courtyard, steady, unhurried, and somehow reassuring. The air is thick with the scent of burnt wood, the lingering perfume of Yemeni coffee, and a faint trace of cumin that has drifted in from a nearby stall selling roasted chickpeas. You straighten the iron kettle, feeling its weight settle into your palm, and you notice how the kettle's handle bears a small dent, a reminder that even the most robust tools acquire stories over time. He begins, his voice a measured baritone that rises just enough to cut through the smoke without startling the other patrons. The Sultan's canon, refined in 1546, now protects the coffee itself, he says, his words rolling like the slow, deliberate strokes of a calligrapher's pen. The decree against theft of this bean is not merely a punishment. It is a safeguard for a commodity that has become as vital to our city as the water that flows from the Kemer aqueduct. You watch the flame flicker, casting fleeting shadows that dance across the low wooden beams, and you sense the irony in his statement, how a law meant to preserve a humble drink must be enforced with the same severity once reserved for the theft of gold or silk. Yet the merchant's tone carries no bitterness. It is simply the tone of someone who has learned to accept the empire's contradictions as part of the daily rhythm. The lanky scholar, still seated on the bench beside you, leans forward, his faded fez perched precariously on his brow. He adjusts his robe, the fabric rustling softly, and his eyes, bright with the curiosity of a man who has spent countless evenings poring over the Sultan's edicts, meet the merchants. A stricter punishment for coffee theft, he replies, may indeed protect the trade, but it also sows resentment among those who cannot afford the luxury of a cup without fear of confiscation. His voice is thin, almost a whisper, as if he is aware that the very walls of the coffeehouse have heard similar debates for decades. He gestures toward the copper cup in his hand, the metal catching the lantern's glow, and you notice the faint patina that tells of many refills, many conversations, many moments of quiet contemplation. The scholar's words linger in the smoke, curling upward like the tendrils of incense that occasionally drift from a nearby shrine. You listen, the iron taste of the coffee still present on your tongue, a bitterness that mirrors the tax levied on merchants, a levy that, though not yet formalized, is already whispered about in the back rooms of the market. The merchant's argument, however, is not without its own subtle humor. He chuckles softly, a sound that seems to echo the gentle clink of a copper cup against stone. If the Sultan wishes to protect coffee, perhaps he should also protect the patience of those who wait for it, he says, his eyes briefly flicking to the fire, where a small ember glows stubbornly against the surrounding ash. The irony is quiet, a dry smile that acknowledges the absurdity of protecting a drink with the same vigor once reserved for fortifying the empire's borders. The conversation drifts as naturally as the smoke that curls toward the rafters. You notice the way the lantern's flame catches on the edges of the merchant's beard, turning each strand into a filament of light, and you think of the Ottoman Navy's recent loss at Lepanto in 1571, a defeat that still haunts the taverns and coffeehouses of the city. The merchant, perhaps unconsciously, draws a parallel between the Navy's ships and the flow of coffee across the empire. Just as the fleet once guarded our coasts, the law now guards our cups. The comparison is not lost on the scholar, whose thin voice softens. Guarded, yes, but at what cost? The people who cannot afford the protection may feel the weight of the law more than the weight of the cup itself. Their words rise and fall in a rhythm that mirrors the slow pour of fresh coffee into tiny porcelain cups, each pour a measured act, each sip a moment of contemplation. You pour another cup, the steam rising in a thin veil that mingles with the lingering smoke. The porcelain is cool to the touch, its surface glazed with a faint blue that hints at the Iznik tiles that once adorned the walls of the palace built by the master architect Sinan. The cup's rim bears a small chip, a testament to countless hands that have lifted it over the years. As you hand the cup to the merchant, you feel the weight of the moment settle like dust on the low beams, a quiet afterglow that seems to soften the edges of the debate. The merchant lifts the cup, his fingers wrapping around it with a familiarity born of many evenings spent in this very room. He takes a sip, the bitter liquid sliding over his tongue, and you notice a faint smile tug at the corner of his mouth, a smile that acknowledges the shared humanity in their discourse, even as they stand on opposite sides of the argument. The scholar, his notebook open on the bench, scribbles a few lines in a careful hand. The ink, dark and slightly smudged, forms characters that will one day become part of the larger tapestry of Ottoman scholarship. He pauses, looks up, and his gaze meets yours for a brief instant. In that glance, there is a quiet recognition of the role you play, not merely as a server of coffee, but as a silent observer, a keeper of the room's rhythm, a participant in the subtle exchange of ideas that flow as freely as the steam from the kettle. You feel a faint ache in your back, a reminder that the work of tending to the hearth is as steady as the tide of the Bosphorus, and yet it grounds you in the present, anchoring you to the stone walls that have witnessed centuries of conversation outside. The city hums softly. The distant call to prayer drifts over the rooftops, its cadence measured, its tone steady. The sound weaves through the narrow streets of Galata, past the wooden shutters of the nearby workshops, and settles into the coffee house like a gentle tide. Inside, the debate continues, now softened by the shared act of drinking, the shared warmth of the fire, the shared awareness that the empire's laws, like the coffee beans themselves, are subject to the passage of time and the patience of those who consume them. The merchant's voice lowers, his argument now more contemplative than confrontational. Perhaps, he says, the law should be as gentle as the steam that rises from our cups, guiding rather than binding. The scholar nods, his eyes reflecting the lantern's amber glow, and replies, and perhaps the people should be as resilient as the beans that survive the long journey from Yemen to our tables. The night deepens, and the fire's glow becomes steadier, its embers glowing like distant lanterns in a sleeping city. The smoke that curls toward the ceiling settles into a soft blanket, muffling the sounds of the street beyond. You watch the shadows lengthen across the stone floor, the patterns shifting as the flame dances. The conversation, now more a quiet exchange of thoughts than a heated debate, drifts toward the practicalities of daily life, how the price of coffee fluctuates with the season, how the merchants negotiate with the caravanserais overseers, how the scholars seek new sources of knowledge beyond the borders of the empire. Each topic is treated with the same measured cadence, each word placed with care, each pause allowing the smoke to settle before the next thought rises. In the corner, a young woman with a linen shawl folds a small brass tray of dried figs, the fruit's sweet scent mingling with the bitter aroma of coffee. She watches the exchange with a quiet interest, her eyes reflecting the lantern's light. The merchant offers her a cup, and she accepts it with a nod, her fingers brushing the cool porcelain. She takes a sip, and you notice the faint smile that spreads across her face, a smile that acknowledges the comfort found in simple rituals, the solace in shared moments. Her presence adds a gentle warmth to the room, like a soft lantern placed beside the fire, and you feel the night's chill recede, replaced by a quiet contentment that settles over the coffee house like a well-worn coat. The debate eventually wanes, the arguments folding into one another like the layers of a well-knit rug. The merchant leans back, his shoulders relaxing, the tension in his voice dissipating like the last wisps of smoke that rise from the fire. The scholar closes his notebook, the ink still fresh on the page, and places it gently on the bench. Their conversation, now reduced to a series of soft nods and occasional murmurs, blends seamlessly with the ambient sounds of the coffee house, the low clink of copper cups, the rustle of parchment, the distant call of the muezzin echoing across the rooftops. You watch the fire's embers glow faintly, each one a tiny beacon of steadiness in the quiet night. You stand, feeling the familiar ache in your back, a reminder of the hours spent bending over the hearth, of the weight of the kettle that has become an extension of your own arms. You straighten the copper kettle once more, its iron handle cool against your palm, and you feel the rhythm of the room settle back into its gentle pulse. The lantern's flame steadies, its amber light casting a soft halo over the stone walls, and the smoke that lingers above the rafters seems to pause, as if holding its breath in reverence for the quiet that follows the debate. The night settles around you like a well-worn coat, comforting and familiar, inviting you to breathe in the lingering aroma of coffee and the faint scent of burnt wood. You linger a little longer by the fire, the low crackle of the coals a steady pulse against the night's hush. The heat rises in thin ribbons, curling around the iron kettle that has become an extension of your own hands, its copper belly darkened by years of use. The scent of the coffee you have just poured lingers in the air, a bitter perfume that mingles with the faint, sweet trace of the rosemary and thyme that grow in the garden behind the house. Their leaves pressed against the stone walls release a green, almost medicinal aroma when the night wind brushes them, a reminder that even in a city of marble and minarets, the earth still pushes its humble roots through the cracks. You watch the flames flicker, their orange tongues licking the soot-blackened bricks. The firelight throws soft shadows across the low-ceilinged room, turning the worn wooden benches into silhouettes of old friends. The lantern hanging from the beam sways gently, its amber glow catching the dust motes that drift lazily like tiny, forgotten memories. The smoke that curls from the kettle's spout curls upward, forming a thin veil that seems to soften the stone's coldness. As if the very walls were breathing with you, your thoughts turn, as they often do in these quiet moments, to the garden beyond the back door. It is a modest plot, fenced with a low wall of reclaimed bricks, its soil dark and damp from the recent rain that fell over the city's rooftops. In the corner, a small patch of rosemary stands stubbornly, its needle-like leaves glinting with dew. Beside it, thyme spreads in a low carpet, its tiny purple flowers nodding in the night breeze. The garden is not a grand oasis. It is a practical space, a place where the kitchen's needs are met and where, on rare evenings, you can steal a breath of green amid the stone and smoke. The plants have learned to thrive in the shadow of the great Suleymaniye Mosque, whose towering dome looms over the city like a silent guardian, its silhouette still fresh in the memory of the day's fading light. You feel a quiet resolve settle in your chest, as steady as the tide that rolls against the Bosphorus. The idea comes not from a sudden epiphany, but from the slow accumulation of moments. The scholar's thin voice discussing distant campaigns, the merchant's gruff argument about the canon, the soft rustle of parchment in the scribe's hands. All of them speak in a language that you have heard but never fully understood, a script that curls and loops in ways that feel both alien and intimate. The calligraphy on the Sultan's decrees, the legal codes that shape the market's taxes, the edicts that dictate the flow of water through the city's aqueducts. These are the threads that bind the city together, yet they remain out of reach for someone whose daily labor is measured in the weight of a kettle and the sweep of a broom. You reach into the pocket of your loose trousers, fingers brushing against the rough weave of the fabric. Inside lies a scrap of parchment, its edges frayed, its surface stained with the faint ink of a merchant's receipt for silk measured in sarek. The paper is thin, almost translucent, and the ink has faded to a soft brown, like the color of the coffee that has just been poured. You pull it out, letting it unfold in the firelight. The script is cramped, the letters tight, the numbers barely legible. It is a reminder of the countless transactions that keep the market alive, of the hands that count and the eyes that watch. You fold it carefully, as if tucking away a secret, and slip it back into the pocket, feeling the slight weight of intention settle there. The vow you make to yourself is modest, almost shy, yet it carries a weight that feels larger than the stone walls that surround you. You will learn to read the calligraphy on the Sultan's decrees, to decipher the words that shape the city's future. It is not a grand rebellion, nor a dramatic proclamation. It is a quiet act of agency, a personal rebellion against the illiteracy that still grips many of your neighbors. In a world where the Tugra of Suleiman is stamped on arches, and the sound of the muezzin calls the faithful to prayer, the ability to read the inked commands of the empire is a subtle power, a way to understand the currents that move beneath the surface of daily life. You think of the scholar, his faded fez and dust-covered robes, who once spoke of campaigns in Hungary with a tone that was both weary and proud. You recall the merchant's voice, gravelly and firm, arguing over the canon's stricter punishments for coffee theft, a law that, in its own way, protected the very commodity that fills your kettle each night. You remember the scribe, ink-stained fingers moving across parchment, the soft scratch of his reed pen echoing the distant call to prayer. Their words, their arguments, their quiet presence have all been part of the tapestry of this evening, each thread adding texture to the night's fabric. The fire crackles, sending a brief flare of light across the stone floor, illuminating a speck of ash that drifts lazily before settling. You watch it, noting how it resembles a tiny, fleeting star, a reminder that even the smallest particles have their place in the larger sky. The ash, like the coffee grounds that settle at the bottom of the kettle, is a residue of the day's work, a reminder that every action leaves a trace, however faint. A soft wind slips through the cracked window, carrying with it the distant murmur of the city's streets. The sound of a cartwheel on cobblestones, the low hum of a conversation in the bazaar, the faint clatter of a horse's hooves, all blend into a muted symphony that seems to echo the rhythm of your own heartbeat. The night outside is cool, the air carrying a faint hint of the sea, a salty tang that mingles with the earthy scent of the garden's herbs. It is a night that feels both expansive and intimate, a night that holds the weight of the empire's history while allowing space for a single, quiet promise. You sit a little longer, the fire's warmth seeping into your fingertips, the kettle's metal cool against your palm. The thought of learning the script is not daunting. It feels like a gentle climb up a familiar stair, each step marked by the soft tread of a footfall on stone. You imagine the first letters, the simple strokes, the way the ink glistens under the lantern's light. You picture yourself tracing the curves of a tugra, feeling the subtle pressure of the pen, the slight resistance of the paper, the satisfaction of a line completed. It is a vision that steadies you, that grounds the abstract promise in a tangible act. A faint smile touches the corner of your mouth, a quiet acknowledgement of the irony that the very act of serving coffee, a drink that was once a novelty, a foreign import from Yemen, has led you to this moment of contemplation. The coffee, once a luxury, now fills the cups of scholars, merchants, and laborers alike, its bitterness a constant companion to the city's fortunes. The same bitterness that once seemed a harsh reminder of taxes and levies now feels like a shared taste, a common thread that binds the patrons of this modest house of stone. You glance at the copper kettle once more, its surface mottled with the patina of countless evenings. The kettle, like you, has endured the wear of time, the occasional spill, the occasional clank that sounds like a muted bell in a distant mosque. It has been lifted, set down, polished, and left to cool, its purpose unchanging. In its quiet steadiness, you find a mirror for your own resolve, to persist, to learn, to add a new layer to the routine that has defined your days. The night deepens, the shadows lengthen, and the fire begins to settle into a softer glow. The lantern's sway slows, its amber light becoming steadier, as if the room itself is breathing in a slower rhythm. You feel the weight of the vow settle into your bones, a gentle pressure that is neither heavy nor burdensome, but simply present, like the faint ache in your back from bending over the floor earlier. A reminder that the body remembers its work even as the mind reaches for new horizons. You rise, the wooden floor creaking softly under your boots, and step back toward the bench where the scholar and the merchant have already drifted into quieter conversation. Their voices are low, their words a murmur that blends with the crackle of the fire. You take a seat, the bench's worn wood supporting you as it has supported many before, its surface smoothed by countless elbows and knees. You let the fire's warmth settle around you, the smoke curling lazily toward the ceiling, a veil that hides the world's harshness just a little longer. In the quiet of the evening, you allow yourself to imagine the future evenings when you will sit with a fresh piece of parchment, a quill in hand, tracing the elegant loops of the Sultan's decrees. You see yourself turning the pages of a ledger, the ink of the script catching the lantern's light, each word a step toward understanding the mechanisms that move the city's grand machinery. You feel a quiet anticipation, a gentle excitement that does not disturb the calm but adds a subtle pulse beneath it. The night stretches on, the fire's embers glowing faintly, the smoke settling like a soft blanket over the room. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in the mingled scents of coffee, rosemary, and stone, feeling the rhythm of your own breath align with the slow, measured pulse of the city beyond the walls. The vow you have made is now a quiet promise held within you, as steady and unhurried as the tide that laps against the Bosphorus shore. When you finally open your eyes, the lantern's glow has softened to a... You hear the soft knock before the door opens, a muted tap that seems to echo against the stone walls as if the building itself were listening. A young woman steps inside, her linen shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders, the fabric whispering against the worn floorboards. The shawl is pale, almost the color of the early morning mist that lingers over the Bosphorus, and it moves with a gentle rustle that blends into the low hum of conversation already filling the room. Her veil, modest and dark, drapes over her hair in the customary fashion of Fati's bustling districts, leaving only the faint curve of her cheek exposed to the amber glow of the lanterns. She carries a small brass tray, its surface dulled by years of handling, the patina catching the lantern light in brief, fleeting glints. On the tray sit a handful of dried figs, their skins a deep amber, the flesh still plump beneath the sun-kissed exterior. The figs are the same variety that travel from the Levant, crossing deserts and seas on caravans that wind through the empire's vast trade network, from the Maghreb's spice markets to the bazaars of Persia. You notice the faint scent of the figs, sweet, almost honeyed, with a hint of earth that speaks of the orchards where they were once hung in heavy clusters. Waiting for the sun to dry them, she approaches the fire, the heat curling around her shoulders like a quiet companion. The fire's orange tongues lick the stone hearth, sending up thin ribbons of smoke that curl toward the low ceiling, mingling with the lingering perfume of Yemeni coffee that has settled into the walls over the years. You can hear the faint crackle of the wood, a sound that seems to keep time with the slow, measured breaths of the patrons. The woman's steps are soft, almost reverent, as if she is aware that each footfall might disturb the delicate balance of the room's atmosphere. She offers the tray to you with a slight bow, her eyes briefly meeting yours before slipping back to the flickering shadows. "For the caffei," she says in a voice that is both gentle and steady, the word rolling off her tongue with the ease of someone who has given this small offering many times before. The caffei, the traditional tip given to coffeehouse attendants, is a modest gesture that carries a weight of respect in these walls. You accept the figs, feeling the cool metal of the tray against your palm, the weight of the figs balanced just so, as if the brass itself were aware of the ritual it supports. You notice the way the figs settle on the tray, each one a tiny, dark island amidst the brass. The fig skins are slightly cracked, the edges frayed like the pages of an old ledger you once glimpsed behind the bar, where the coffeehouse's records of patrons and transactions are kept. There is an irony in the offering. The figs, sweet and preserved, contrast with the bitter coffee that fills the cups of the scholars and merchants around you. It is a quiet reminder that even in a place where the taste of the empire is often sharp, there are moments of softness that slip in unnoticed. She takes a seat near the fire, the heat brushing against her cheek, the veil catching a stray ember's glow and turning it a faint rose. Her gaze drifts to the scholar's notebook, the leather-bound volume where he drafts verses about the Bosphorus's night currents. The notebook's pages are filled with careful, looping script, the ink dark against the parchment, each line a ripple of thought that mirrors the water's own flow. She watches him for a moment, the way his pen moves with a deliberate slowness, as if he is trying to capture the very breath of the city in his words. The scholar, a lanky figure in a faded fez, does not look up. He is lost in his own world, the words on his page forming a quiet dialogue with the smoke that curls above the fire. You can hear the faint rustle of his parchment, the soft scrape of his quill as it pauses and then continues. The woman's presence adds a subtle layer to the room's texture, a gentle warmth that seems to soften the edges of the stone walls. As if the fire's light were reaching farther than it physically can, you pour a fresh cup of coffee for her, the dark liquid swirling in the copper pot, the steam rising in thin, fragrant spirals. The coffee's aroma is rich, the scent of roasted beans mingling with a faint hint of cardamom that has begun to appear in the blends of recent years, a spice that arrived via the same routes that once delivered the beans themselves from the highlands of Ethiopia. The cup you set before her is small, porcelain, its surface glazed with a faint blue that catches the lantern's amber light. The cup's weight is comforting in your hand. The coolness of the ceramic, a counterpoint to the fire's heat, lifts the cup with a careful grace, the thin porcelain rim touching her lips. The first sip is quiet, the bitterness of the coffee meeting the sweet undertone of the figs she has just tasted. There is a moment of pause, a stillness that seems to stretch beyond the walls of the coffee house, as if the city itself were holding its breath. The taste lingers, a reminder of the empire's complexity, the bitter and the sweet, the ancient and the new, all intertwined in a single fleeting sensation. Around you, the other patrons continue their conversations in low tones. A merchant with a gray-streaked beard discusses the recent shipment of silk that arrived from Bursa, his voice a soft rumble that blends with the crackle of the fire. A servant from the nearby caravanserai wipes his hands on a threadbare cloth, the fabric frayed at the edges, the same cloth that has seen countless spills and mended moments. The atmosphere is steady, the rhythm of the evening unhurried, each sound a small, measured beat in the larger pulse of the city. You notice the way the smoke from the fire curls upward, forming shapes that remind you of distant ships on the Bosphorus, their masts invisible but implied in the swirling patterns. The smoke seems to carry with it whispers of the Ottoman Navy's recent loss at Lepanto in 1571, an event that still lingers in the hushed conversations of those who remember the battle's echo. The loss is not spoken aloud, but it is present in the way some eyes linger on the horizon beyond the windows, where the night sky meets the water's dark surface. The young woman's eyes, partially hidden by the veil, flicker with a quiet curiosity as she watches the fire's dance. She seems to be listening more than speaking, absorbing the room's stories as if they were threads she might later weave into her own narrative. Her smile, when it appears, is subtle, a soft curve that does not disturb the calm but adds a gentle warmth to the space, like a lantern placed beside the fire. It is a smile that acknowledges the shared humanity of the room, the unspoken bond between those who serve and those who are served. You think of the figs again, their sweet flesh a small rebellion against the bitterness of the coffee, a reminder that even in a world governed by distant edicts and heavy taxes, there are moments of simple generosity that slip through the cracks. The figs are a modest offering, yet they carry the weight of trade routes that span continents, the labor of hands that harvested them, the patience of merchants who stored them, and the quiet gratitude of a woman who brings them to you. The conversation drifts. The scholar finally looks up, his eyes meeting yours for a brief instant. He nods, a silent acknowledgement of the shared ritual of the coffee house, the unspoken agreement that each cup poured, each fig offered, each word spoken, is part of a larger tapestry that stretches across the city's stone streets and the empire's vast expanse. His gaze then returns to his notebook, the ink flowing once more, the verses about the Bosphorus's night currents resuming their quiet rhythm. The fire continues to crackle, its embers glowing like distant lanterns in a sleeping city. The smoke settles, thickening the air just enough to make each breath a deliberate act, a reminder of the room's intimacy. You feel the weight of the moment, the calm that settles like ash after a flame, the gentle hush that follows a soft exchange. The young woman finishes her cup, the last sip leaving a faint trace of coffee on her lips, a reminder of the shared experience that binds you all in this modest stone box. She rises, the linen shawl swaying slightly with each movement, the veil catching a final flicker of light before she steps back toward the door. The brass tray, now empty, rests against the wooden counter, its surface reflecting the lantern's amber glow. She pauses at the doorway, turning back for a moment, her eyes meeting yours once more. In that brief exchange, there is a quiet understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the small kindnesses that keep the night steady. The door closes with a soft click, the sound echoing faintly against the stone, as if the room itself were exhaling. The figs, now gone, have left behind a lingering sweetness in the air, a subtle perfume that mingles with the coffee's bitter aroma. The fire's light steadies, the shadows retreating just enough to reveal the worn wooden benches and the stone floor, each surface bearing the marks of countless evenings like this one you return to your duties. The kettle's iron handle cool under your palm, the copper pot waiting to be filled once more. The night outside deepens, the sky over Galata a dark canvas dotted with distant lanterns, the city's sounds muffled by the stone walls. Inside, the coffeehouse remains a quiet harbor, a place where the smoke drifts like a soft blanket, where the exchange of figs and coffee becomes a gentle rhythm that steadies the heart. You settle back into the familiar routine, the subtle irony of a sweet offering amidst bitter brew, a quiet reminder that even in an empire marked by grand ambitions and heavy taxes, there is room for small, unassuming acts of kindness. The fire's glow warms your fingertips, the scent of figs and coffee lingering in the air, and you feel the night's calm settle around you. The clatter of porcelain slices the thick amber hush that has settled over the room, a sudden crack that seems louder than the distant muezzin's call. You turn, the fire's orange tongues flickering against the low stone ceiling, and see a copper cup, once solid, now a constellation of shards, lying half embedded in the cold floorboards. The broken piece is a bright shard of Iznik pottery, its cobalt blue veins still vivid, as if the glaze remembers the sky over the Bosphorus on a clear summer day. You bend, the weight of the kettle at your side a familiar anchor, and pick up the fragment with the same steady hands that have steadied countless kettles and ladles. The shard feels cool against your palm, a reminder that even the most prized objects can fracture under the slightest misstep, much like the empire's own ambitions when they meet the stubbornness of reality. You set the fragment on a small brass tray that rests near the hearth, its surface dulled by years of soot and spilled coffee. The tray, a relic from the coffeehouse's early days, bears the faint imprint of a maker's mark, an unassuming crescent surrounded by a circle, its meaning lost to time, but its presence a quiet testament to the continuity of craft. As you arrange the pieces, you notice the way the light catches the edges, turning each crack into a thin line of silver, like the delicate calligraphy of a sultan's decree that you have only recently begun to read. The irony is soft, almost invisible. A broken cup, once whole, now mirrors the fragmented script you are learning to decipher, each piece holding a story that is still waiting to be understood. The patron who dropped the cup, a middle-aged man in a faded kaftan, his beard peppered with the dust of the market, looks up, his eyes reflecting the fire's glow. He offers a low apology, his voice a thin thread woven through the smoky air. You smile, a quiet, unhurried gesture, and tell him that the loss is minor compared to the empire's larger wounds, such as the recent famine in Anatolia that forced many to trade grain for coffee. The comment hangs in the room, a muted echo of the broader world beyond the stone walls, and you sense the patron's shoulders relax as if a small weight has been lifted. He nods, his gratitude expressed not in words, but in the gentle way he settles back onto the bench, his hands clasped around a fresh cup that you pour with practiced ease. You grind fresh beans for him, the stone grinder's teeth turning slowly, each rotation a soft, rhythmic rasp that blends with the crackle of the fire. The scent of the coffee rises, mingling with the lingering perfume of burnt wood and the faint, exotic aroma of the Yemen beans that first arrived in the city a few years prior, around 1553. The air thickens with the bitter edge of the brew, a taste that matches the empire's own taxes, those bozuk levies that were meant to fund the sultan's fountains but often left merchants grumbling. As the hot liquid fills the copper cup, you notice the way the steam curls upward, forming delicate ribbons that disappear into the ceiling's low arches, as if trying to hide the world's harshness behind a veil of vapor. While the patron sips, you turn your attention back to the broken shard. You place the remaining pieces on the tray in a careful pattern, aligning the edges as if you were a calligrapher arranging letters on parchment. The shards, though fractured, still hold the vivid blue of Iznik tiles that once adorned the walls of the palace built by the architect Sinan in the 1550s. Their design, a modest geometric motif, recalls the imperial tiles of the Hagia Sophia that were repurposed after the conquest of 1453, a reminder that even the most grandiose structures are built upon layers of history, each layer chipped away and reshaped over time. You think, with a quiet, dry amusement, that the empire's grand projects often leave behind more broken pieces than whole ones, yet each fragment is treasured for its beauty. The fire's glow softens, and the room settles back into its smoky lull. The lantern above the bar sways gently, casting amber shadows that dance across the stone walls, as if the light itself were listening to the conversations that drift through the room. You hear the scholar's low voice from earlier, now a faint murmur about the Janissaries' campaign in Hungary, his words threading through the thick haze like a thin filament of thought. The older merchant's beard, flecked with gray, twitches slightly as he adjusts his posture, perhaps recalling his own arguments about the canon's stricter punishments for coffee theft. Their debates, measured and deliberate, echo the measured steps of a calligrapher tracing the sultan's tugra on paper, each stroke deliberate, each pause intentional. A servant from the nearby caravanserai, still wiping his hands on a threadbare cloth, passes by your station. He glances at the broken shard and offers a quiet, "Afiyet olsun," his tone respectful yet weary, as if he has seen many such accidents in the bustling life of the market. You nod, acknowledging his presence, and notice the worn rug beneath his feet, a relic from the early Ottoman period, its modest geometric pattern reminiscent of the imperial tiles you just examined. The rug's fibers, frayed at the edges, speak of countless footsteps, of merchants, scholars, and travelers who have crossed its surface, each leaving a faint imprint that fades with time. You feel a faint ache in your back from bending, a reminder that the work is as steady as the tide of the Bosphorus, never truly resting, but always moving forward. The patron finishes his cup, the last drops of coffee disappearing into the copper vessel. He places the cup gently on the table, the clink soft, like a muted bell in a distant mosque. He looks at you, his eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and curiosity, and asks in a low voice whether the broken shard can be repaired. You consider the question, recalling the old craftsman's saying that a repaired piece is stronger for having been broken, its cracks filled with gold, a philosophy known as kintsugi in distant lands, though you have never heard it spoken here. You smile, the irony subtle, and tell him that while the shard may never be whole again, its story is now richer, its brokenness a testament to the moments it has witnessed. You set the shard aside, its place on the tray now a small altar of sorts, a focal point for contemplation. The fire crackles, sending up occasional sparks that rise like tiny stars before fading into the darkness above. The room's atmosphere settles back into its gentle rhythm, the low hum of conversation, a soft backdrop to the occasional clink of copper cups and the rustle of parchment. You notice the faint scent of rosemary and thyme drifting from the garden behind the coffeehouse, a reminder of the small green space where herbs fight for room among the stone. The garden's quiet growth mirrors the slow, patient learning you have undertaken, each new leaf a word deciphered from the Sultan's decrees. A thin veil of smoke curls around the low beams, forming shapes that remind you of distant ships, perhaps a quiet nod to the Ottoman Navy's recent loss at Lepanto in 1571, an event that still lingers in whispered conversations. The smoke, like memory, drifts upward, then settles, its presence both comforting and fleeting. You watch it for a moment, feeling the weight of history settle like ash in the hearth, a quiet presence that does not demand attention but simply exists, steady and unhurried. The night deepens, and the lantern's amber light grows softer, as if the room itself is preparing for rest. You clear the broken pieces, placing them carefully into a wooden box that sits beneath the counter, its interior lined with soft cloth to protect the delicate shards. The box, worn from years of use, bears the faint imprint of a previous owner's initials, now barely legible, a silent witness to the countless objects that have passed through these hands. You close the lid gently, the click of the wood resonating like a quiet promise that the story of the shard will be preserved, even if it remains incomplete. You turn back to the patron, who now lines back, his gaze drifting toward the fire. He sighs, a soft exhale that seems to release the tension of the evening. You offer him a fresh cup, this time adding a pinch of cardamom, a spice that arrived via the same routes that once delivered Ethiopian coffee beans, its fragrance subtle yet distinct. The addition of cardamom brings a new layer to the brew, a gentle warmth that spreads through the room like a quiet ember. The patron smiles, a faint, appreciative curve of his lips, and you sense that the simple act of sharing coffee, even in its broken moments, creates a bond that transcends the noise of the city outside. The fire's glow wanes, the embers turning from bright orange to a soft, smoldering gray. You sweep the ash from the hearth, the motion rhythmic, each sweep a breath in the quiet night. The ash, like the remnants of the day's conversations, settles into a thin layer, a reminder that even the most fleeting moments leave a trace. You glance toward the doorway, where the night's chill begins to seep in, carrying with it the distant call of the muezzin, its cadence echoing across the rooftops. The sound is steady, a reminder that time moves forward, unperturbed by the broken cup or the shattered shard. You step back from the counter, feeling the cool stone beneath your feet, the texture of the floorboards worn smooth by countless footsteps. The room, now quiet, holds a calm afterglow, like dust settled on low beams after a storm. The lantern's flame flickers one last time before dimming, its amber light fading into the shadows. You linger a moment longer, allowing the silence to settle around you, a soft blanket that cushions the day's end. In this stillness, you sense the continuity of the coffeehouse, a place where broken things are gathered, repaired in memory, and where each cup poured carries the weight of history, yet remains light enough to be held in a single hand. The night's quiet lessons settle into your bones, a gentle reminder that even in moments of fracture, the hour is late, the moon a thin, waning crescent that hangs low over the golden horn, its pale light spilling through the narrow slit of the doorway and catching the dust motes that drift lazily above the low-ceilinged stone room. The fire in the hearth has settled into a soft, amber glow, the last of its crackle fading into a gentle hiss as the embers turn to ash. You hear the distant call to prayer echo faintly from the minaret beyond the street, a low, measured cadence that seems to keep time with the slow breathing of the city itself. A soft-spoken scribe steps through the doorway, his sandals making barely a sound on the worn flagstones. His hands are stained with ink, the dark pigment clinging to the knuckles and the thin skin of his forearms, evidence of countless hours spent coaxing letters from reed pens onto parchment. He carries a modest bundle of scrolls tied with a frayed cord, the edges of the paper yellowed by the humidity that clings to the stone walls. The scribe's eyes, though tired, hold a quiet determination. He is a man who has learned to read the world in the thin lines of calligraphy, and tonight he seeks a quiet corner where the murmurs of other patrons will not disturb the delicate rhythm of his work. You guide him to a secluded table near the fire, the heat rising in thin ribbons that curl around the iron kettle and the copper cups that line the shelves. The table is scarred with the faint imprint of countless cups, a map of small circular stains that tell a story of evenings spent in similar quietude. He sets his bundle down with a soft thud, and you notice a small, folded piece of parchment tucked beneath the scrolls, a receipt for silk, its ink faded, the numbers barely legible. It is a reminder that even in the midst of legal texts, commerce never truly rests. He asks for a cup of coffee, and you oblige, reaching for the familiar copper pot that has hung over the fire for as long as you can remember. The water bubbles gently, the sound a low, steady murmur that blends with the distant muezzin's call. You add the freshly ground beans, their dark aroma rising like a slow, fragrant tide. As the brew drips into the small porcelain cups, a faint hint of cardamom, an exotic spice that has traveled the same caravan routes that once brought the beans from the highlands of Yemen, permeates the steam. The scent is warm, slightly sharp, and it settles into the room like a soft blanket, muffling the sharper edges of the night. The scribe lifts the cup, his fingers wrapped around the delicate handle, and takes a sip. The bitterness of the coffee meets the subtle spice, a combination that mirrors the balance he seeks in the legal manuscript before him. He opens the bundle, revealing a copy of a portion of the canon name, the legal code that continues to shape Ottoman administration. The pages are dense with ornate script, each line flowing with the precision of a calligrapher's hand, the letters curving and looping in a dance that has been practiced for generations. The scribe's reed pen rests lightly on the edge of the page, its tip poised to add marginal notes, to correct a misspelling, to underline a clause that may be of particular importance. You watch the scribe work, the scratch of his reed pen a soft, rhythmic sound that joins the faint crackle of the fire and the occasional sigh of the wind slipping through the cracked window. The ink flows dark and steady, each stroke a small act of preservation, a quiet rebellion against the erosion of memory. The canon name, compiled under the reign of Sultan Sulayman, is more than a collection of statutes. It is a living document that reflects the empire's attempt to order the world, to bring a measure of predictability to the bustling streets of Istanbul, to the markets of Galata, to the distant villages that send their grain to the city's granaries. In the pause between his sentences, the scribe mentions the Kemer aqueduct, completed in 1555. A marvel of engineering that carries fresh water from the hills to the heart of the city. He speaks of the stone arches that rise like silent sentinels over the landscape, the channels that whisper through the night, delivering life to the fountains that dot the public squares. The aqueduct, you recall, was a quiet triumph of the empire, its presence unnoticed by most, yet essential as the breath that fills the lungs. The scribe's voice is low, almost reverent, as if he is aware that his words are part of a larger current. A stream that will one day merge with the countless other narratives that flow through the city's veins. A subtle irony drifts through the conversation. As you note the scribe's careful attention to the legal text, while the very act of writing it is a reminder of the empire's reliance on the labor of countless unseen hands, those who quarry stone for the aqueduct, those who tend the coffee plants in distant highlands, those who weave the rugs that line the floor beneath your feet. The coffee you serve, once a novelty from Yemen, has become a staple, a commodity that now bears its own tax, a levy that funds the fountains that the aqueduct supplies. The scribe in his quiet corner is both a participant in and an observer of this intricate web. The night deepens, the moon slipping further into the darkness, and the scribe's eyes begin to droop. The candle on his table flickers, casting a wavering light that makes the ink on the parchment appear to dance. He pauses, setting the pen down, and leans back, his shoulders relaxing as the fatigue of long hours settles into his bones. He offers a small, grateful nod, his voice barely above a whisper, thanking you for the coffee and the quiet space. You respond with a gentle smile, aware that the simple act of offering a cup of coffee is, in its own way, a gesture of hospitality that has endured through centuries. He gathers his scrolls, the bundle now slightly heavier with the added weight of marginal notes and a few corrected phrases. The scribe's steps are slower now, each footfall a soft thud on the stone, as if he is mindful not to disturb the lingering embers. As he passes the doorway, the night air brushes against his cloak, carrying with it the faint scent of the Bosphorus, salt, distant fish, a hint of seaweed. The scribe pauses at the threshold, turns his head, and for a moment his gaze meets yours, a silent acknowledgement of the shared quietude that has bound you together this night. When he steps out into the street, the door closes with a muted click, the sound echoing faintly in the emptying room. The fire continues to glow, its light now softer, the shadows longer, the smoke curling lazily toward the ceiling where it lingers like a memory. You take a moment to watch the ash settle, each speck a tiny reminder of the night's passage, each ember a lingering promise of warmth. The room feels still, the conversations of earlier hours now reduced to a low hum that seems to emanate from the very walls. You pour another cup of coffee for yourself, the steam rising in thin, curling tendrils that disappear into the dimness. The bitterness of the brew is tempered by the lingering cardamom, a flavor that feels both familiar and distant, much like the scribe's work, rooted in the present, yet reaching back to the foundations laid by those who came before. You sip slowly, feeling the warmth spread through your chest, the heat a gentle counterpoint to the cool night that presses against the stone windows. The night stretches on, the moon a silent witness to the city's quiet rhythm. The scribe's departure leaves a subtle vacancy, a space that feels both empty and full, as if his presence has left an imprint that will linger in the smoke and the scent of coffee. You sit back, your back against the wooden bench, the grain of the wood cool beneath you, and let the sounds of the city seep in, the distant clatter of a carriage on cobblestones, the soft murmur of a night watchman's voice, the occasional bark of a dog far away. In this moment, the world feels balanced on a thin line of smoke and steam, of ink and water, of law and daily life. The scribe's work, the coffee's bitterness, the fire's glow all converge into a single, steady breath. You inhale the lingering aroma of coffee, the faint scent of cardamom, the smoky perfume of the hearth, and exhale, feeling the night's quiet settle deeper into the stone walls, into the very floor beneath your feet. The night, with its soft shadows and muted sounds, holds you gently, as if cradling a You sit at the small wooden desk that has been tucked into the shadowed rear of the coffeehouse for as long as you can remember, its surface scarred by the countless cups that have been set down in haste, by the occasional spill of oil from a lamp, by the faint imprint of a pilgrim's sandal that once slipped through the doorway on a rainy evening. The desk is modest in size, no larger than a loaf of bread, yet it feels like a little altar to the quiet work you have promised yourself. A single candle flickers on its edge, its flame a thin, amber line that trembles against the draft that slips through the cracks in the stone walls. The light it casts is soft, painting the parchment before you in a warm glow that makes the ink appear almost alive, as if each stroke were breathing in the hush of the room. The parchment is thin, the kind of paper that was once used for tax registers and imperial edicts, its fibers still bearing the faint scent of the reed pens that once pressed their ink into it. It bears the date 1557, the year the great Suleymani Mosque rose from the hill of the city, its domes and minarets still echoing the ambition of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. The decree itself is a taxation directive aimed at the merchants who sell coffee, that dark, bitter brew that has become a staple of the house's patrons. It orders that a modest levy be collected from each seller, the proceeds to be funneled into the maintenance of the public fountains that dot the streets of Istanbul, the fountains that, in their own way, keep the city alive with the sound of water. You trace the looping letters with a fingertip, feeling the slight roughness of the ink where the calligrapher's quill hesitated, where a flourish was perhaps too eager. The script is a form of divani, the elegant cursive used for official documents, its curves sweeping like the arches of the nearby caravanserai, its dots placed with the same precision a mason would use when setting a stone. You have never been taught to read it formally. The scholars who pass through the coffeehouse speak of the art of calligraphy as a discipline reserved for the elite, a skill that can turn a simple word into a work of art. Yet here in the dim light, the letters begin to make sense, each one a small bridge between the world of the Sultan's court and the low, smoky floor of your own shop. The first line declares the amount of the tax. A sum that seems modest when spoken aloud, yet when you consider the price of a single cup of kava, still bitter, still unadorned with the sugar that will become fashionable in later decades, you realize the impact it will have on the merchants who line the bazaar. The decree mentions bazak, the tax that will be collected not in gold, but in a mixture of copper and silver, a practical solution for a city whose markets are filled with merchants of many tongues and many coins. You note with a quiet smile that borders on irony that the empire's grand fountains, which are meant to provide water for the thirsty and a place for travelers to rest, will be funded by the very drink that keeps the city's conversations flowing. It is a small, almost poetic exchange. Water for coffee, coffee for water. Your mind drifts, as it often does when you are alone with the night's quiet, to the countless evenings you have watched patrons lean over their cups, their faces illuminated by the glow of the lanterns, their voices low as they discuss the latest news from the frontiers, the latest decree from the palace, the latest rumor about the Janissaries' movements. You recall the scholar in the faded fez, his thin voice threading through the smoke, his words about the campaign in Hungary, his eyes bright with the same curiosity you now feel as you decipher this script. You think of the older merchant with the gray beard, his arguments about the law's strictness, his laughter that rose like the crackle of the fire. All those moments have been a backdrop to the rhythm of the coffee house, a rhythm that now seems to echo in the measured cadence of the decree's sentences. The candle sputters slightly, sending a brief ripple of shadows across the parchment. You pause, allowing the flame to settle, and listen to the low hum that fills the room. The fire in the hearth crackles, sending up a thin plume of ash that drifts lazily toward the ceiling, where it settles on the low wooden beams like a soft blanket. The smell of the wood, seasoned and slightly sweet, mingles with the lingering aroma of coffee that has seeped into the stone walls over the years. It is a scent that is both comforting and a little melancholy, as if the walls themselves have absorbed the stories of every patron who has ever sat here, every cup that has been poured, every word that has been spoken. You turn the parchment over, revealing the seal of the Sultan, an intricate tugra that curls like a wave of ink across the paper. The seal is impressed in a deep, dark wax, its edges slightly cracked from the passage of time. You run a fingertip lightly over the wax, feeling the faint ridges where the seal's design has pressed into it. The tugra is a reminder of the empire's reach, of the hand that guides the city's laws, of the power that flows from the palace down to the smallest coffee house in Galata. Yet here, in this modest space, the decree is not a distant edict. It is a living document, one that you can hold, that you can read, that you can understand. A soft rustle comes from the doorway as a patron steps out, his coat damp from the night's chill, his boots leaving a faint imprint on the stone floor. He pauses, glances at the candlelight, and then moves on, his presence a brief interruption in the stillness. You do not turn to him. You remain focused on the parchment, on the lines that are beginning to form a picture in your mind. The decree mentions the maintenance of fountains, and you think of the water that flows from the Kemer aqueduct, completed a few years ago, its channels bringing fresh water into the city's heart. You imagine the sound of water gurgling in stone basins, the coolness of it against a traveler's hand, the way it reflects the light of the moon on a quiet night. The fountains are more than just utilities. They are places where people gather, where children play, where the city's pulse can be felt in the steady flow of water. Your thoughts settle back onto the parchment. The next paragraph of the decree outlines the penalties for those who attempt to evade the tax, describing fines that are to be levied and, in more severe cases, the confiscation of goods. You note, with a faint hint of dry humor, that the empire's concern for fairness extends even to coffee, that the very act of sipping a cup could become a matter of legal scrutiny. It is a reminder that in this age, even the most mundane aspects of daily life are woven into the fabric of law and order. You consider the irony of a society that builds grand mosques and majestic palaces, yet spends careful attention on the regulation of a humble beverage. The candle's flame steadies, and you feel a gentle warmth spreading from the desk to your hands, a quiet reassurance that you are not alone in this pursuit. The vow you made weeks ago, whispered to yourself in the glow of the fire, now feels less like a distant promise and more like a thread that has been tugged into place. The act of reading the decree is itself a small rebellion against the illiteracy that surrounds you, a quiet assertion that knowledge can be claimed even by those who have not been given formal instruction. It is a modest step, but it is yours, and it carries the weight of the night's lessons, the weight of the smoke that has risen and settled over the coffee house for years. You set the parchment aside for a moment, allowing the candle's light to dance on the wooden surface of the desk. The wood is worn smooth in places, the grain visible where the varnish has thinned. You run your thumb along the edge, feeling the faint splinters that have become part of its character. The desk has supported many hands, many cups, many conversations. It has witnessed the arrival of the first coffee beans from Yemen, the first clatter of the stone grinder, the first sighs of patrons as they tasted the bitter brew. It has also held the weight of your own aspirations, the quiet hopes that have taken root in the corners of your mind, like the rosemary and thyme that grow in the garden behind the shop. Returning to the decree, you begin to copy the most important passages onto a fresh sheet of paper, your own hand moving slowly, deliberately, each letter formed with care. The ink flows darkly, the strokes confident yet gentle, mirroring the rhythm of the fire's crackle. As you write, you feel a sense of connection to the calligrapher who originally penned the document, to the scribe who once traced the same letters with a reed pen, to the scholars who have studied the law, to the merchants who will now have to count the tax in their ledgers. The act of copying becomes a meditation, a bridge between past and present, a way to internalize the words that will shape the city's future. A faint breeze slips through the doorway, carrying with it the distant call to prayer that rises from the minaret of a nearby mosque. The muezzin's voice is low, resonant, a reminder of the rhythm of the day that will soon replace the night's quiet. The sound weaves through the smoke, through the candlelight, through the parchment, binding all the elements of the coffee house into a single, unhurried breath. You listen, and the sound seems to settle into your chest, a gentle pulse that steadies your thoughts. You finish the transcription, the final line of the decree now inked onto the fresh paper. You compare the two sheets, noting the subtle differences in the way the letters curve, the way the ink settles. You feel a quiet satisfaction, a soft smile tugging at the corners of your mouth, not out of triumph over the empire's complexities, but because you have taken a step forward in understanding them. The candle flickers once more, its flame a small, steady beacon in the dim room. You lean back in your chair, the wood creaking softly under your weight, and let your eyes wander over the room. The benches are empty now, the chairs pushed in, the fire reduced to glowing embers. The smoke that has risen all evening hangs low, a veil that seems to soften the stone walls, turning their roughness into something more tender. The night has deepened, and with it, the sense that you are part of a larger tapestry, a single thread woven through the fabric of Istanbul's history. You close the fresh parchment, tuck it beneath the candle, and allow the flame to burn a little longer, its light a quiet companion to your thoughts. The night is still, the city outside hushed, the only sounds the occasional clink of a distant copper pot and the soft sigh of the wind through the narrow streets. In this moment, you feel the weight of the decree settle gently onto your shoulders, not as a burden, but as a quiet affirmation that you have listened, that you have learned, that you have become a small part of the empire's ongoing story. The candle's wick shortens, the flame steadies, and you breathe in the lingering aroma of coffee, of wood, of stone, feeling the night's lessons settle into your bones. The world outside waits, patient and unhurried, as you sit in the soft glow, content in the knowledge that the promise you made has begun to bear fruit, modest though it may be. The fire's ember glow warms the. You push the iron-clad door shut with a soft click that seems to echo farther than the stone walls allow, as if the night itself were listening for the final note of a lullaby. The heavy key turns in the lock, its teeth biting into the brass with a muted sigh, and the sound settles into the stillness that has been gathering like ash in the hearth. Outside, the first pale blush of dawn spreads across the sky, a thin rose-colored veil that lifts slowly over the roofs of Galata, revealing the tangled silhouettes of wooden warehouses and the distant spires of the Suleymani Mosque. Its grand dome still catching the early light as if it were a lantern newly lit after years of waiting. The street beyond the doorway is quiet, save for the occasional scrape of a wooden cartwheel on the cobblestones. A sound that feels both ancient and fleeting. A thin mist clings to the water of the Golden Horn, rising in soft tendrils that curl around the stone arches of the nearby caravanserai. The air carries the faint scent of sea salt mixed with the lingering perfume of burnt coffee, a reminder that the night's smoke has not yet fully dispersed. You inhale, feeling the coolness settle on the back of your throat, a gentle contrast to the warm, smoky breath you have been exhaling for hours. Inside, the coffeehouse is a hushed shell of its former bustle. The low-ceilinged room, once filled with the clatter of copper cups and the murmur of conversation, now rests under a blanket of stillness. The fire in the hearth has dwindled to a few orange embers, their glow faint and steady, like distant lanterns flickering in a sleeping city. The ash that once rose in lazy spirals now lies settled in a thin gray carpet across the stone floor, each particle a tiny record of the night's countless breaths. You sweep the ash with a worn wooden broom, the bristles moving slowly, each stroke a measured rhythm that matches the slow beating of your own heart. The broom's wooden handle is smooth from years of use, its surface bearing the faint imprint of countless hands that have guided it across the same floor. As you push the broom forward, you notice a small, dark speck of coffee that has resisted the sweep, clinging stubbornly to the edge of a stone slab. You pause, fingers hovering over it, and think of the countless spills that have marked this place, each one a tiny accident, a reminder that even in a world built on stone and law, imperfection persists. You brush it away with a gentle flick, the speck scattering like a tiny comet across the floor, and a faint smile touches your lips, as if the act itself were a quiet rebellion against the notion of flawless order. The benches, worn smooth by the weight of countless patrons, sit in a row beneath the low beams. Their wood is darkened by the smoke that has risen and settled over the years, the grain softened by the heat of countless evenings. You run a hand along the edge of one, feeling the faint ridges where a cup once rested, the faint imprint of a copper mug that has long since been washed away. The bench seems to hold the memory of every conversation, every whispered secret, every argument over the price of a single grain of pepper. You think of the scholar who once debated the Janissaries' campaign, the merchant who argued over the canon, the young woman who offered figs, each a thread woven into the fabric of this place, now lying still, waiting for the next hand to pull at them. A thin wisp of smoke still curls from the hearth, rising lazily toward the ceiling where it meets the dark wood beams. The smoke moves in slow, deliberate loops, as if it were a dancer performing a private ballet for an audience of stone. You watch it for a moment, noting how the patterns it draws are reminiscent of the intricate arabesques that adorn the tiles of the Hagia Sophia, repurposed and reimagined after the conquest. The smoke's movement is a quiet reminder that even the most solid structures are subject to the gentle erosion of time, softened by the breath of daily life. You glance toward the small wooden desk tucked in the back corner, its surface cluttered with parchment, ink pots, and a single candle whose flame flickers with a soft, amber glow. The candle has been burning since the night's first cup, its wax slowly melting, forming a tiny pool that catches the light and throws it onto the pages. The parchment before you bears the curving script of a decree issued in 1557, the same year the magnificent Suleymaniye Mosque was completed under the watchful eye of Mimar Sinan. The letters, once alien symbols, now feel like old friends, each curve and dot a familiar shape you have learned to read. You trace a line of text with a fingertip, feeling the faint rustle of the ancient paper, the way it yields just enough to reveal its secrets without breaking. The decree speaks of a tax on coffee merchants, a levy intended to fund the maintenance of public fountains that dot the city's streets. You recall the irony of a beverage that once sparked suspicion and was deemed dangerous enough to warrant a death penalty, now becoming a source of revenue for the empire's public works. The thought brings a quiet chuckle to the back of your throat, a dry, understated amusement at how the tides of policy shift as subtly as the Bosphorus's currents. You note the faint watermark of a silk merchant's seal in the corner, a reminder that the empire's economy is a tapestry woven from many threads, spices, textiles, coffee, and the labor of countless hands. A soft rustle draws your attention to the doorway, where a thin veil of morning light filters through the iron-grilled window. The light falls in pale bars across the floor, creating a lattice of shadows that move gently as the wind brushes the shutters. The wind carries with it the distant call to prayer, the muezzin's voice rising in a measured cadence that seems to echo through the ages. The call is both a reminder of the city's rhythm and a gentle summons to the day's duties. You listen, feeling the resonance of the words settle into your bones, a quiet affirmation that the world continues its endless cycle, unhurried and unperturbed. Outside, the market stalls begin to stir. The smell of fresh bread from the nearby bakery drifts through the open door, a warm, yeasty aroma that mingles with the lingering scent of coffee and the faint tang of sea air. The baker's loaves, still warm from the oven, are placed on wooden boards, their crusts golden and slightly cracked. You think of the stale bread you once noted on the table, baked the night before, and smile at the thought that each day brings a new batch, each loaf a small promise of sustenance, however modest. The baker's hands, dusted with flour, move deftly, shaping dough with a practiced rhythm that mirrors the steady beat of the city's heart. A few fishermen linger near the doorway, their faces weathered by the sea, eyes half closed as they sip the last of their coffee. Their voices are low, a soft murmur that blends with the creak of the wooden floorboards as they shift in their seats. You watch a thin line of smoke rise from their cups, curling upward and disappearing into the morning air. Their presence feels like a bridge between the night's quiet contemplation and the day's inevitable labor. You nod to them, a silent acknowledgement of shared endurance, and they return a faint, tired smile, their eyes reflecting the pale light of dawn. You turn back to the desk, the candle now burning lower, its flame dancing in a gentle, unhurried rhythm. The parchment before you is illuminated in a soft halo, each letter a small beacon of knowledge. You feel the weight of the night's quiet lessons settle into your bones, a gentle pressure that is neither burdensome nor heavy, but rather a comforting presence, like a well-worn coat draped over a tired shoulders. The act of deciphering the decree has become more than a personal vow. It is a quiet participation in the empire's ongoing story, a modest thread woven into a vast tapestry that stretches across centuries. The fire's embers crackle faintly, sending up a few wisps of ash that rise like tiny ghosts before fading into the air. You watch them disappear, each one a fleeting reminder of the night's transience. The room, bathed in the soft glow of the candle and the lingering warmth of the hearth, feels like a sanctuary, a place where time moves at its own measured pace, unhurried by the outside world's clamor. You take a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air mix with the lingering warmth of the fire, a balance that feels both grounding and uplifting as the sun climbs higher. The pale rose of dawn deepens into a richer amber, spilling gold across the rooftops of Galata and the domes of the city's many mosques. The light catches the copper kettle hanging from the wall, its surface gleaming with a soft sheen, as if acknowledging the new day. You straighten the kettle, its iron handle cool to the touch, and set it aside, a small ritual that marks the transition from night to day, from contemplation to action. You step toward the doorway once more, the iron key still in your hand, its weight familiar and reassuring. The lock clicks open, and you push the door wide, allowing the fresh morning air to flood the room. The wind carries with it the distant sounds of the city waking, the clatter of horse hooves on stone, the murmur of merchants arranging their wares, the soft rustle of prayer beads being counted in a nearby house of worship. The city's heartbeat is audible now, steady and unhurried, a rhythm that has persisted through wars, famines, and the rise and fall of sultans outside. The cobblestones are still damp from the night's mist, each stone cool beneath your bare feet. You walk slowly, feeling the texture of the ground, the subtle variations that tell of countless footsteps that have passed before yours. The coolness of the stone against your soles is a quiet reminder of the city's ancient foundations, a solid base upon which the present rests. You pause for a moment, looking back at the coffeehouse's darkened doorway, its wooden frame now bathed in the soft glow of sunrise. The building stands as a silent witness to the night's quiet exchanges, its walls holding the echo of conversations that have drifted away like smoke. You turn forward, the market ahead alive with the soft chatter of vendors arranging figs, spices, and textiles. The scent of fresh bread grows stronger, mingling with the salty tang of the Bosphorus, creating a fragrant tapestry that fills your senses. You feel the weight of the night's lessons settle into you, not as a burden, but as a gentle warmth that steadies your steps. The promise you made to learn the script of the Sultan's decrees has taken root, its fruit now ripening in the quiet satisfaction of understanding. The city, with its layered histories and quiet constancies, seems to acknowledge your small achievement with a soft, approving breeze. You walk toward the market, the rhythm of your footsteps matching the measured cadence of the city's awakening. The cobblestones echo faintly